Hello, so I'm talking to you, as was said, from the project Bridging the Gap. With my team, it's myself and Dimitrios, who is also at the Rosalind Franklin Institute. And this is mainly about our findings so far. So the gap that I am talking about in this project is what I would call the access problem. Research projects are often approved long before someone actually gets infrastructure access. There's key project information that it already exists for the project to have been approved, but it rarely gets reused within IT or infrastructure teams. And this means IT infrastructure teams end up recreating decisions manually and often under a time pressure where someone is saying, I already have money, I want to be able to spend it, can you do this immediately? So the result is we end up with delays, we end up with duplicated effort, and we end up with inconsistent outcomes. So we chose to look at discovery and engagement as the first part of our project. We did interviews across research administration, IT and infrastructure teams, governance, and compliance roles. And in these, we focused on how access decisions are made, where the information is being lost or re-entered, and what currently is blocking the automation process. We then followed this up by running a cross-role workshop where we had discussion about our initial plans. We found that there were common issues across a lot of institutions. And by institution in this, I am talking very broadly. We found that manual re-entry of the same project metadata was happening in multiple systems. We found that there was slow account and resource provisioning that was being driven by human workflows. There was a really weak linkage in a lot of places between administration approval and the technical enforcement. And a lot of the times, this led to difficulty answering who has access, for how long, and particularly why. If an IT team just gets told, put someone on this project, okay, I'll do that. Why do they have access? Well, I don't know. I was told to put them on the project. And this leads to a breakdown when we come to giving feedback about where our resources are being used. This lack of knowledge about potentially how long someone is going to be on a project can also lead to offboarding and access expiry being handled late or inconsistently. So in terms of key insights from the interviews, we found that the gap generally is structural, not technical. Most institutions already have some form of approval workflow. They already have identity systems, and they already have access control mechanisms, whether these are well put together or manually run processes. The problem is that these systems do not talk to each other. Policy discussions and decisions are not being expressed in machine readable ways. And as a result, there is a trust boundary that is stopping automation before it can start. So the last thing that we asked people was, how would you define an ideal system? What are your most important points? And these are ones that came together from multiple sources. We found that people wanted to be able to reuse the existing metadata to trigger the access decisions. In fact, that would make their life easy. Federated or single sign-on across services where possible would really help with this, especially when you're dealing with cross-institution projects, which happens in pretty much every area of academia. Clear ownership of who approves what and when is very important when you're trying to make decisions at a policy, funding, and infrastructure level. Better auditability is an important thing, But it's also important that we put systems in place that mean we can give better auditability without increasing the burden on administrators, whether this is project administrators or DRI administrators, digital research infrastructure. And finally, the automation must respect policy and compliance constraints. There are often limitations, for whatever reasons, on how and why people can access specific infrastructures and from where. And this means that there must be a strong process that limits this automation to make sure that we're not making decisions that are not allowed. In this, it comes to the constraints that we can't ignore. So the regulatory and contractual requirements of different digital research infrastructures vary very widely. Also, when dealing with the infrastructures themselves, legacy and heterogeneous infrastructure is the norm in a lot of places. As much as we have many brand new HPC facilities that are amazing and have more flexibility, when you're looking at something like a university, it's the piece of kit that has been left over from a project that someone did a few years ago and is now been repurposed. Some checks must remain human controlled. There has to be the availability for a human in the loop if that is what an institution requires. And finally, institutions differ in risk tolerance and maturity. Some institutions are willing to push ahead and go quick, and others may be much more entrenched in the ways that they work and will take more considerable, slow approaches to making change. This all came from the interviews, and then we held the workshop. And what changed after the workshop? Well, initially, we had been looking at a process that would go from the project approval system to the digital research infrastructure itself. And it was pointed out to us that actually there are a couple of steps in here that potentially we do not need. It is not about capability. There are already many pieces of software that are used, especially within the high performance computing area or across cloud computing around provisioning, group creation, and those kinds of interactive roles. What is missing is the connection and the visibility. A lot of the times if you were to ask an infrastructure team within a university, when they are working on a small scale project and they have not worked with high performance computing, they do not know about these systems. And that means that for them to automate their processes, there is an additional boundary that they do not know there is software already existing. So they are potentially looking at having to cost and create and do research on what is available. We got strong feedback that many of the digital research infrastructure provisioning actions are open source tools. They are tools that people can add to and extend and potentially can meet the capabilities of what we need. In this, we are very much pivoting from designing new systems to looking at where we can connect and extend what already exists. In terms of our current focus, we have three clear areas where we can apply our effort. The first one is making existing software visible, especially outside of traditional HPC communities. We can look at building connectors, look at what APIs, plugins, and integration patterns are needed in order to be able to make these connections. And finally, as our project is titled, look at filling the gaps. And we found the gaps particularly exist at the start and the end of the life cycle. It is taking inputs from research administration systems where they exist or from spreadsheets where they don't, handling the expiry, review, and particularly data offboarding at the other end. No funding body wants to get to the end of a grant and find that because someone didn't take their data off of a system, it's gone. But equally, you can't hold on to it forever. So these are very, very difficult policy and governance decisions. Because of this, they are often very difficult to codify or to make machine readable, especially where we are looking at a situation where academia is not a single project. Oh, I've done this and it's done. It is, I've applied for a grant. Oh, I got another grant, do a little bit more. And so on until eventually they stop finding money. And this means that the system must be flexible and able to deal with these exceptions. Also, in terms of the starting process, we are having to design for a messy reality. Project data does not arrive in one nice format. So we are designing to be able to work with spreadsheets, to be able to work with structured reports, hopefully, and for one of our partners that we are working with is WorkDrive, APIs and webhooks, which is particularly useful, but also where we have email handoffs, can we catch and automate them? And our goal here is progressive improvement. Very rarely are you going to immediately go straight to the perfect system, but where can we take a step that makes things easier and smoother? So the roadmap is starting to take shape. We are looking at a modular approach so that institutions can adopt pieces independently. We are looking at clear boundaries, the gap between policy decisions and technical enforcement, and where do different aspects of this process live. We are looking at providing integration patterns, decision points, and responsibilities that must be considered. And most importantly, we're aiming to ground this in existing tools and workflows. So for the next phase of the project, we are refining the integration patterns based on feedback. We are mapping where can administration metadata realistically flow today. And we're going to document what is already possible, where extension is required, and how can we achieve that? And what must remain manual for a lot of places for now. And we're going to continue validating as we iterate. As many people have done, I'm going to invite you to join us for a final workshop on the 25th of June at Harwell campus. And if I've got any time, I will leave the slide up, but if not, the QR code is also on our poster outside.